Next up, we are going to draft our torso sloper. What is a torso sloper, you may ask? Well, it is essentially adding our bodice and our skirt slopers together. It is when you do not want your garment to end right at your waist, or you don't want there to be a seam line there. Oftentimes, our garments do not end right here at our waist. They go a little bit lower to like our high hip or even our hip level. Or sometimes we want to create a dress that does not have a seam at the waistline. That's what we would use our torso sloper for. So they come in quite handy. It is yet another foundation for us to use to start a little bit closer to what our garment design is, so we don't always have to use our bodice and skirt and put them together every time we want a design like that. So let's get drafting. Meet me at the overhead camera and we'll get started. Here's what you're gonna want for drafting your torso slopers. We're gonna be referencing chapter 18 in our textbook. You're gonna want your front and back bodice drafts that we drafted earlier in the semester. You're gonna need your standard rulers like your L-square ruler, your hip stick, and your clear gridded ruler. Some of the typical accoutrements that we may need are some tape, scissors, French curve, punch hole or awl notcher, and pencil and eraser. I will be utilizing a Sharpie on this draft, just like always, so that you guys can see on the camera what I'm doing. Let's get started. Page 385 in our textbook is where we're gonna start. You have a few measurements to fill in, just a few right here on page 385. And then we have a little bit of prep work before we get started. Essentially what you're gonna wanna do is take your front and back bodice draft, trace them on a piece of paper and cut them out. And then meet me back here. So you'll see that I have traced off my front and back slopers. So I have replicas of my slopers. I've cut them out. The next thing I need to do is follow the instructions on page 385. What it is telling us is to label our side waist where our waistline and our side seam on our front bodice meets. We're gonna label that X. We are going to draw a line from our mid-shoulder dart down to our bust apex. That is going to be our slash line. So remember, you're not going to your dart point, you're going to your bust apex up to your mid-shoulder dart. Draw a slash line. I'm also going to connect my waist dart legs to my bust apex as well. So it should look like that, your front. Now let's do our back. We're gonna do the same thing where our side seam meets our waistline. We're gonna label that X. We're gonna draw a slash line starting kind of right below our notches on our back armhole. And we're gonna connect that down to like about 2 inches in from our side seam along our waistline. My handy dandy ruler is 2 inches wide, so I'm just gonna connect my lowest notch to about 2 inches in on my waist. Slash line. All right, now we're gonna need to go get some soft pattern paper and we're gonna start with our front torso draft, okay? So you can put the back one away, but keep it handy. And meet me back here in just a second. We're gonna start drafting our front torso sloper. You can start following along in page 186 of your textbook. We're gonna start by sort of drafting our center front and our hip level. The hip level is the bottom of our torso sloper. If you remember back to the skirt sloper, you remember that everything below the hip level on our sloper was essentially just a rectangle. So that's why we sort of stopped the torso sloper at the hip level. If you want to extend it, it's very simple. It's just a rectangle. So take your L square ruler, have the long side closest to you on your paper, have the short side near the left side of your paper, and you are just going to trace an L around it. Again, the corner of your L should be over by your left hand. We're gonna label this corner A. Now, along this hip level line, we are going to measure our front hip arc plus a little bit of ease, which is gonna be 9 5/8. So we're gonna start at A, measure 9 5/8 out, and give ourselves a mark. Label that B. I want you to square a line up from B. You can do that using your clear gridded ruler or your L square ruler, whichever you prefer. One way to make sure that that's really squared is to measure it here. It should be 9 5/8 inches away. And then come up here and measure it. It should also be 9 5/8 inches away from your center front line. So from A along this line and from B, I want you to measure to the right 8 inches. The textbook is not clear on what this measurement is, but it is essentially our hip depth, okay? So you're measuring from the hip up to your waist. And again, that measurement is 8 inches from B to the right and from A to the right. You're gonna label this on your A line, you're gonna label that D. And over here, you're gonna label this C. Connect C to D. This is going to be our hip, and this will be our waist. I also want you to label this center front. Over here at C, I want you to measure towards yourself 3/4 of an inch and put a little dot on your waistline. I'm gonna circle it so I know where it is. The next thing we're gonna wanna do is take our front bodice sloper. I want you to cut along this original dart leg to, but not through the bust apex. And then I want you to cut on this slash line to, but not through the bust apex. So your bodice tracing you should have these two separate sections that hinge at the bust apex, okay? The next thing we're gonna do is place it so that our center front and our waistline meet up, and we'll tape this centermost section in place to hold it there. The next thing we're gonna do is, so we have this secondary section over here, kind of this side bodice, and we are going to pivot this waist dart closed until the X, this corner right here, touches somewhere along our waistline. It may not touch right at the dot. That's totally fine. Just pivot it until it touches somewhere along that waistline. And then tape that in place. So ultimately what we've done is we have essentially closed about half of our waist dart and opened it up here at the mid shoulder. When I closed my waist start, the X ended up touching almost exactly at my C, the intersection of my C. Yours should be somewhere close to that, okay? The next thing you're gonna do is you're gonna start here at the center front neckline. You're gonna trace around this entire bodice sloper until you get over to where the X touches your waistline, okay? Don't trace any of this dart or anything like that. Make sure as you did that, you transferred your bust apex, the location of that. And you can do that even by using your awl or a punch tool. So you get a really accurate location for that. You also want to transfer your armhole notch. And what I did was I just created little notches, so to say, right at the ends of my dart legs, and I will fill those in later. Now you can remove this. I'm going to fill in here where my tape was. Next up, you can follow along on page 388 of your textbook. Figure 8 is going to show us the waist darts that we're going to do. Because remember, we had part of a waist dart here that we did not trace off. The torso sloper is a bit different in that we have to do contour waist darts. Now, what contour waist darts are is that they are pointing to two separate apexes at the same time. The majority of the intake is taken in on the waistline, and then it's released for the bust, and it is released for the hip, okay? So I am going to start off with circling and labeling my apex, so I know where that is. I'm going to draw in my preliminary dart legs in pencil that go back to the apex. Now that I have those in, I am going to back my dart point off by 1 inch. I want to back it off 1 inch from the apex. So I line the apex up with the 1 inch mark on my ruler. I find the middle point between those two dart legs and give myself a dot. That is my new dart point. Now I can connect the dart point back to my notches back here. Those are my dart legs. Feel free to erase these others now. All right, so I want you to create a few guidelines that are going to be kind of the top and the bottom of our contour darts. I want you to square a line out from center front, and I want it to be 1 inch lower than the bust apex. So what you can do is, again, line up the 1 inch mark on your ruler with your apex, and then make sure that another one of these smaller lines is lined up with center front. Really take your time doing this to make sure that this line is definitely squared from center front. It does not have to go all the way across. You just kind of want it to be in this center-ish area. We're going to do the same thing, but we want it to be 3 inches below the waistline. So I'm going to measure 3 inches below the waistline over here, 3 inches below the waistline over here, and then I can connect them. Definitely making sure that, again, we are squared off from center front. Again, it doesn't have to go all the way across. Just make sure it's in the centermost section. Next, what I'm going to do is I want to connect these two guidelines with a line that runs straight down from my apex, okay? One way we can go about this is measuring how far away from center front is our apex. Mine is 4 1/8 inches. So I'm gonna measure from center front 4 1/8 inches on this guideline, and I'm gonna measure from center front 4 1/8 inches on this guideline and connect the two. Now this is going to be kind of the center fold line of our centermost contour dart. We are going to have a second contour dart over here on this side. I want you to make a line parallel to this 1 3/4 inches away, okay? So we're gonna go 1 3/4 inches away from us and make another contour dart guideline. The easiest way for me to do this is to line the 1 3/4 inches line up with this line and just make another one. Okay, so again, this line comes straight down from our apex. This line is 1 3/4 inches away from us. Come here along the waistline. I want you to measure 1/4 inch on either side of these lines, okay? 1/4 inch on either side. So here's a closer look at what I got going. I got a guideline 1 inch down from my apex, squared out from center front. I got a guideline 3 inches down from my waistline, squared out. I connect the two guidelines with a line that comes straight down from my apex, and then I have another one that's 1 3/4 inches away, all right? I have gone and measured 1/4 inch on either side of these contour dart guidelines. 1/4 inch on either side, all right? Now, essentially what we're doing is connecting the dots. We are connecting this down to our dart point, up to here, up to this dart point, and then back down, okay? And I highly recommend using the power of like the end of your pencil to kind of hold your spot so you get really accurate dart lines, okay? So hold that exactly where you want it to be. Bring your ruler up to it, and then pivot your ruler over to your dart point. Hold your pencil right on your dart point. Pivot your ruler where it needs to go. Do the same thing to your other one. Just like all other darts, we're gonna put punch holes and circle them in red at all the dart points. Now, contour darts, we're gonna do that for these upper and lower dart points. We're also gonna do them for the width of the dart along the waistline, okay? So you are going to have 4 punch holes circled in red at each dart. And that is so that whenever you go to use this to develop a garment design, you can transfer these 4 markings, connect the dots, and you'll have an accurate representation of these contour darts on the pattern that you traced underneath. Okay, we have a little bit left to do. We need to deal with this sort of side waist area. You'll see it on figure 8 in your textbook. We are going to, it doesn't matter sort of where our side seam is on here, we are going to connect it to the dot right here. So I want you to take this corner at the bottom of your armhole and connect it to your dot in a straight line. If you used pencil, you can go ahead and erase that. That is no longer going to be our side seam. This is now gonna be our side seam. Now below the waist, from the waist down to our hip, we sort of wanna do what we did on our skirt, which is we want it to come up and sort of curve into the waist. I'm gonna use my hip stick for that. How I'm gonna do it is hold my pencil right here and slide my ruler along it until I find a really nice curve that goes straight from my hip, kind of gently up into my waist. Okay? Now what I like to do here, if this is looking a little bit angular to you, right where this side seam kind of bends at the waist, you can take your French curve or something and just sort of curve it a little bit more gently. Just so it's a bit smoother of a curve instead of a sharp angle. Don't forget to punch hole this dart as well. The last thing you need to do is to add a label and call this your front torso. You are also going to add a grain line to this as well. This is very similar to our front bodice and our front skirt, where we default to cutting this on the fold, so there's no seam line in the front. So I would do a cut one on fold, okay? So fill in your label, fill in your grain line, and then meet me back here and we will do our back torso slipper.